Okay, today we're talking about the distributive property, lesson 2-4 on page 40. How can you use the distributive property to evaluate expressions or solve expressions? So make sure you write down this definition or an example for it. The distributive property states that multiplying a sum or a difference by a number gives the same result as multiplying each number in the sum or in the difference by the number and adding or subtracting the products. And if you look in this little example there, it says A times, in parentheses, here's my little parentheses, B times C plus C is the same as saying, well, I can just multiply A times B, and then of course it's adding, and add it to the same thing, A times C. Or if I have a number A times, in parentheses, B minus C, well, that's the same thing as multiplying A times B, and then, see, I'm subtracting this time, minus A times C. So really what you're doing is using mental math to help solve problems easier. So look at the next example with numbers and maybe it'll make more sense. I start off here with 5 times 27. Now if you were going to solve 5 times 27 and try to do it in your head, you'd have to carry and it would be kind of difficult, or you'd want to use paper and you'd start writing down 5 times 27, working it out, carrying, and you can do that, but it's more work than if you really think about using the distributive property. So instead of multiplying 27 by 5, break 27 apart into two easier numbers. A number that has a 0 on the end, like 20, plus 7, they do here, because 20 plus 7 is obviously 27. So we take the ones place and take it out and separate it from the 20. So now we have the exact same thing. 5 times 27 is exactly the same as 5 times 20 plus 7. So distribute that 5. When you're think of the word distribute, think of you're passing that out. Well, I'm going to spread that multiplication of 5 to 20 and then to 7. And I'm going to add those products together. So here they just show it written a little bit differently. Again, 5 times 20 plus 5 times 7. So now if you're trying to solve this in your head, instead of saying 5 times 27 and I break 27 apart, well, 5 times 20 is 100 plus that 7, 5, not just 7, because it's still 5 times 7, which is 35. Add it together and you get 135. It's a lot easier and quicker, and you can do it in your head, although I want you to write these steps down. Okay, the other example at the top of page 41 has used the distributive property to join numbers together and to find a difference. And here it's 8 times 32 minus 8 times 2. So they have it written here, 8 times 32 minus 8 times 2. Well, we can write it this way. Both 32 and 2 are being multiplied by 8, and we're going to subtract this. So it's the same as saying 8 times, in parentheses, 32 minus 2. Now, if I take 2 away from 32, I get 30, a much easier number to multiply 8 by, which is why we want to go ahead and find the difference first. And remember, when you're multiplying 8 times a number like 30, okay, think of it as 8 times 3, which is your 24, okay, and then just add your 0, which makes it 240. So it's a lot easier to do this in your head. But remember, you're writing down these examples and showing your work. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the guided practice on page 40, 1 through 4. Take a minute to pause me on each one and figure out what the missing number is. I have highlighted in yellow. Remember, your equal sign is like a balance, so what's on the left side of the equal sign has to balance what's on the right side of the equal sign. And then, it doesn't say it, but we're going to go ahead and solve this using the distributive property to make it something you can solve mentally, that you can do this mental math in your head. So go ahead and pause me and try this one. Okay, so we're looking at number 1, which says 8 times, in parentheses, 7 plus 23 equals 8 times 7 plus 8 times what? Well, if we look back on this side, we have 8 times 7 and 8 times 23. On the right side of the equal sign, we have, well, 8 times 7. So we must be missing that plus 8 times, well, 23. Now, if we were going to solve this with mental math, would we want to do this separately, 8 times 7 and 8 times 23, or do we want to go ahead and add 7 plus 23? Both of them are being multiplied by 8, and you'd get 30, right? 30 times 8, which we did already, and we know that that would be 8 times 3 is 24, plus my 0 would be 240. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2 has 4 times 28 on the left side of the equal sign, and on the right side it has 4 times 20 plus 4 times what? Well, I have 20 of my 28. So, and I'm adding here. What do I need to add to 20 to get 28? Well, hopefully you figured out. That would be 8. Now, it's going to be a lot easier to solve this problem using my mental math if I go ahead and split up 28 into 20 and 8, because 4 times 20 is going to give me 80. And then I know 4 times 8 is 32, and if I add those together, I get 112. All right, let's do number 3. Number 3 has 8 times 57 minus 8 times 7. So what are we really multiplying times 8? There's my equal sign, there's a balance. So what am I really multiplying 8 by? Well, 8 times 57, but don't forget I'm subtracting. So remember that. Minus 8 times 7. So we want to take that 7 away from 57. And what would that leave me with? 50, right? So we know 8 times 5 is 40, plus my 0 over here. So that would be 400. And last but not least, number 4. On the left side we have 5 times 26 minus 3, which would be 5 times what minus 5 times 3? Well, here we have, let me do this with the highlighter, 5 times 3, right, this part, but we're missing 5 times 26, so 26 must be in here. Now, if we want to use the distributive property for our benefit or not use it, then we really want to go ahead and solve this side and take 3 from 26 to get 23. And we're using our mental math. Now I can multiply 5 times 23, or I can go ahead and distribute that between, oh, here, let me write it over here, equals 5 times, break this 23 up, 5 times 20 plus 3, or I can write it as 5 times 20, it's the same thing, plus 5 times 3. And go ahead and solve that in your head, because you can figure out 5 times 20 is, well, 5 times 2 is 10 plus my 0, the 20 plus 15, 5 times 3 is 15, I get 115. No calculator, no setting it up 5 times 23. I do not want to see that, oops, I typo there, 23. I don't want to see this on your paper at all. We're doing mental math here. We're using the distributive property to solve this in our head. Okay, let's say we wanted to solve 5 times 48. Now, there are a couple different ways you might want to do this. The first way is we might go ahead and separate this 48, and let's make it into 5 times 40. plus 8. Or it's better to just put that 5 right up next to it here, because that's what this means. If it's right up next to this parentheses, it means I'm going to multiply 5 times 40 and 5 times 8. And if you want to write it again, like this, 5 times 40 plus 5 times 8, to help see that, that would be great. So 5 times 40 is 200. 5 times 8 is 40. And this is really easy to figure out, that the total would be 240. Is there another way to solve 5 times 48? Sure, maybe you thought in your head I could say, well, 5 times 48 would be the same as 5 times 50 minus 2, because what's 50 minus 2? 48. So let's go ahead and show that distributed. 5 times 50. Now, we're subtracting, don't forget that, minus 5 times 2. Well, 5 times 50 is 5 times 5 is 25. Put my 0 in there. Minus 5 times 2 is 10. 250, take away a 10 is going to give me 240. And yes, same answer for that problem. So you could solve that 2 different ways. It's up to you. Okay, use what you've learned, what you know about the distributive property, to go ahead and solve question, or this problems 1 and 2. One is 7 times 49. Write it out, split it up, whatever. Use the distributive property. Use your mental math. And then also number 2, 8 times 53. Work it out, and then bring a question to class tomorrow. See you tomorrow.